Well, hello there. Welcome to Kerbal101. This is our very first episode, and so we're gonna put things in place to make sure that we get started the right way. And for that, we're gonna need to go through the settings of the game, make sure we activate everything we need, get all the info we need to make our lives easier in the long run. And then I'm gonna walk you through the UI and guide you all the way through to your first orbit. Let's get started, shall we? So in the settings in here, we're going to have to do a couple of things. In the general tab, as we are in here, there's a few things that you'll want to activate that are off by default. We'll want the contract deadlines, the double-click mouse look, as well as the retain control point on IVA. You can also scale up the UI if you want to. In this case, I will scale it up to ridiculously big so that you guys can see things a bit easier. I will also turn on advanced tweakables, the extended burn indicator, very important one, and I'll put in the version watermark so that you guys can see what version I'm playing on. Next up, we're going to go to the graphics, and over here there's only one option that you really have to change that is not, preference. And I strongly advise you to turn on the always show closest approach. That's going to be very useful when we get to docking maneuvers. I'm going to apply this and accept. Next up, we're going to go ahead and start a new game. We're going to create a new file. I'm going to call Kerbal101. And we're going to do it in sandbox mode. This sandbox mode gives you access to a bunch more mechanics and a bunch more pieces to be able to either make better ship or fly them better. Because in career mode or science mode, there's a fair few UI elements that are not going to show up until your pilots level up. So I don't want to have to deal with that just yet. We're going to go full sandbox. And I'm just going to put the proper flag, as we should. And here we are at the Kerbal Space Center. The important one to be able to get to orbit is going to be, well, the launch pad, where we launch rockets from. And we're going to choose a stock ship for now. There are several stock ships that are provided when you first install the game, and we're going to use one of those to get to our first orbit. We're going to use Kerbal1, the very first one. Very simple, very stable ship, and it flies really well. So this is the one we're going to be using. Over here, finally, we have the flight UI. So as you can see, Jebediah Kerman is just hiding behind me. We have over there the Navball, as well as in the very corner, the flight control UI. This is very important, because I can show you the hotkeys using that. So the way the hotkeys work is that they're relative to your camera facing the crew hatch. You can see here, no hatch on this side. It's actually my little icon. On this side, we have the crew hatch. Make sure at the very beginning that your camera is facing the crew hatch. It makes things a lot easier. Controls are relatively simple. We have WASD. W here, actually W here, is going to push the nose away from me. S will push the nose towards me. And you can see this is the pitch axis over here. A and D are the yaw angle. It's going to turn the nose either left or right. Left for A, D for right. And then finally we have the roll axis, which we can actually demonstrate right here on the launch pad. So here I'm holding Q and E to bring it back to where it was. It just rolls, kind of spins the ship. The controls don't change if you fly a plane in this game, so that could be very useful if you need to kind of bank and turn. Next up, we have the staging area all the way here. That shows the order of operation of your rocket. So every time you hit spacebar, one of these stages will activate. So the first time I hit spacebar, it's going to start at the bottom here and go up. So the first time I hit spacebar, it's going to start the engines. All of these is just a sequential use of the spacebar. You just activate each stage every time you hit spacebar. Finally, you got a couple more keys that you need to know. If you look right just on the left side of the nav ball, right there, is your throttle. How much gas are you giving it? You can use shift to bring it up. You can use control to bring it down. And then you have a couple of shortcuts. You have the Z key, locks it at 100%. The X key locks it at 0 and just cuts the engines. And finally, you have the T key, which activates SAS, which is the stability assist system. And suddenly, a whole bunch of other little things show up here on the left side of the nav ball. These are the reason why I am suggesting you start in sandbox mode rather than career, because these only show up when your pilot is level 5. Well, they progressively show up as your pilot levels up. So if I move my camera away for a second, you can see here Jebediah Kerman right now is currently a 5-star pilot, and all of them are in sandbox. Less and less of these icons would show up the lower level you are. That is the main reason why I'm putting you up in sandbox, as well as just having access to more pieces. So we are just about ready to launch now. SAS is on. We're at full throttle. I'm going to use the M key right away just to show you, well, Kerbal, this game's equivalent of Earth. So if I line myself up right above the North Pole, Earth rotates clockwise from this perspective. It's going that way, like this. That means the fastest way for us to get to orbit, speed is relative. The faster we can get our relative speed compared to the surface of the planet, the easier it is going to be for us to get into orbit. If Earth spins this way, that means we have to go that way, which from this perspective means going east. We look on the nav ball here. There's this orange line right there. That is north, which means east is on the right side of the nav ball right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch and I'm going to turn right. Full throttle, spacebar, turn. And now we see over here on the nav ball, a little something has just appeared. A little green icon just showed up. This is our prograde vector. It also shows up here. It's the same symbol that I'm currently hovering. The reason why this shows up is it basically shows you the direction of your momentum right now. I am not going directly in line with where my rocket is pointing because gravity is a thing that exists. So if you have a good look on the bottom left, you're going to see me do yaw inputs just to keep it lined up to just about where it is right now until this vector gets closer and closer to where my rocket is pointing. See, I have to keep it pointing up so that we don't fall back down to Earth. So you can see the yaw going here as I hit repeatedly the A key just to keep it pointed the right way. And you can see that green vector coming closer and closer to me. Okay? And now that we're just about lined up, now I'm not touching the keyboard anymore, and it's flying stable, I'm going to remain there. Now we're gaining speed. Quite a lot of speed. That speed is indicated right here on the nav ball. This nav ball has several modes that you can use by just clicking on where the speed is. You could switch it to orbit or surface mode right now. There's going to be other modes that are going to show up in certain situations. Finally, we got to know where we're going in terms of how high, in terms of altitude. That's indicated right here at the top. So right now I'm about 5 kilometers up, and it shows me how thick the atmosphere is we started all the way to the right here, and it's slowly going that way. So as soon as we hit this line, we're going to be in a slightly thinner part of the atmosphere. Over here, even thinner, and all the way here, that means we're in space. The atmosphere itself is 70 kilometers thick on Kerbal. It varies from planet to planet, but on our home planet, it is 70 kilometers thick for this game. So our objective is to really get out of the atmosphere. How do I keep track of that? If we go back to the map screen over here, we can see here, this is our line, this is our trajectory. The highest point of it is called the apoapsis. We can see it right there. Time to spacebar, side boosters are done. Our apoapsis is currently at 18 kilometers and climbing. But if I don't want to have to hover over this thing the whole time, I could use this little purple button, the maneuver mode button. There we go. So we can see apoapsis, our highest point, periapsis, our lowest point, which is currently negative 500 kilometers because it's in the middle of the planet. These little buttons here we have allow you to point the rocket in various directions. All of them relative to where you're going. The direction of your momentum is what determines all of these vectors. The prograde vector, this little green bit, is literally the direction of your momentum. This is where you're going. Click on that. Automatically, rocket points at it, and your speed actually goes up way faster this way, because now you're not wasting fuel, you're not wasting speed to change direction. You're just gaining speed. So we're going to keep going like this until our apoapsis is out of the atmosphere, until we're out in space. Down here, if you still have the maneuver mode on, you can still see the information. So I'm using this here to gauge if our trajectory is going to take us out of the atmosphere or not. And as you can see, we're almost going completely horizontal. That's the horizon line right there. And that's the point. The point is we have to keep boosting in a way that we miss Earth and not fall back down to it. Our apoapsis is now at 100 kilometers. So I stop the engines. I use the X key for that. And then on our highest point, as you can see, like we're almost halfway there. We're almost at an orbit already. We just need to gain a bit more speed that way. Guess what? If I click on the apoapsis here, it's going to give me the option to add a maneuver. We're going to do that. And if we see our little maneuver node here, our direction of momentum was the prograde vector. That icon is also here. So I'm just going to click and pull onto it. And as you can see a yellow line forming. So what I've done is I've just planned a burn. This is how you plan where you are going. So if I know now that if I do that maneuver, my orbit will look like the yellow line once I'm done. Another thing that did happen that you might have noticed on the navbar is that blue icon just showed up. It's the direction we need to point the rocket at in order to execute the maneuver we just planned. Oh, what do we got over here? This is a maneuver node. This is basically the maneuver direction option on the left of the navball is right there. This is the second most important vector that you're going to have to learn. So if I click onto it, now my ship is pointing at that blue icon. You could see it on the navball. Another little gripe I have with this game sometimes is that when you're in this view, the ship can look really dark. It's kind of hard to see. One thing you can do is you can go to the settings and you can actually scroll down a bit and you have ambient light boosts. I am going to boost my ambient light by about 25%, and suddenly we could see the ship a whole lot better. I know the direction, but I don't know how long and how fast I have to go yet. It's shown in the UI. How long and how fast I have to go is right here. It's 184 meters per second, and it'll slowly come down as I burn. that green bar is going to come down until at the bottom. Once it hits the bottom, you just cut the engines, your maneuver's done. And finally, last aspect you need to know is, when do I need to burn? Well, that is indicated right here. Remember these options I told you to turn on before we started? You wouldn't have that information if you didn't do that. And that tends to make the experience a lot harder for new players. So in this case here, I now know that I have to burn for 9 seconds and that I have to start burning in about 50 seconds. We're just going to wait for that, and we're going to start burning at the right moment. If your start burn time is a long ways away, you could use the period key in order to time warp, and use the comma key to slow down time warp and bring you back down to normal time. And so here we are. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, full power. And I'm just going to hold on to full power for now until this goes down to 0. You saw the camera just change. That camera movement change was not me. It was automatic, and it was to show me now that we are officially in orbit. There we are. We just made it to orbit. Isn't that great? We're in space. Jebediah right there is having the time of his life. Biggest smile on his face. And so should you. You should be proud. You made it to space. Now we gotta go home though. If the prograde vector was the direction you're going, the retrograde vector, which is the other green icon on the Navball, is quite literally the opposite. So this is where you're going to be pointing when you want to slow down. And this is what we're going to want to do. We're going to want to slow down to a point where we re-enter the atmosphere and then just parachute ourselves back home. So I'm pointing the rocket to retrograde, and we're just going to burn. I'm not going to go full throttle. You can see our periapsis here, our lowest point, slowly go down. And I'm keeping an eye on that number over here. There we go. We now have a periapsis at 45 kilometers. And with the atmosphere being 70 kilometers thick, we're going to re-enter the atmosphere. The air is going to help us brake the rest of the way. That's a very useful thing to do, especially if you're low on fuel. Right now we're not, but if you ever are, it's a way to slow yourself down. And now I'm going to use the period key, the dot key, to time warp ourselves a bit faster, because, you know, it takes a while to go around the Earth. As soon as you re-enter the atmosphere, the time warp automatically shuts off, so you can't be, you know, don't be scared about time warping too quickly. It's not gonna crash you. And so now we are back in the atmosphere, going very fast. And if I try to time warp like I just did, it's gonna give you a warning, because if you're in the atmosphere, it's now physics warp, not time warp, meaning every force affecting your ship is gonna be a lot larger. And you can't go over 4 times in this particular context, because 4 times gravity, 4 times air resistant, that is more than enough to explode your stuff if you're not careful. So I do it only while I'm in the very thin part of the atmosphere, at least for now. Some of the parts of it are going to start glowing red if they start getting hot from air friction. As the sun rises back up and we start to catch fire, we could see our speed. It's going to start going down, and we can see our periapsis is now going down. Our apoapsis is now going down. So we are losing altitude. We're losing speed. Now the safest way to bleed some speed right now is to, well, boost. We still have some fuel to use. Might as well use it. So I'm going to go full throttle right now. Still pointing retrograde. And as soon as we go to a suborbital trajectory, the camera rotates like it just did. when that camera rotates, that basically means you're going to either crash or land back down to Earth. Or on whatever planet you're hovering at that moment. So I just finished burning all of my fuel. It's now empty. I'm going to hit spacebar again. And just ditch the engine. We have this little capsule. It should work pretty fine. You can see here that the parachute shows in red. Meaning that if it deploys now, it's probably going to rip off because you're going too fast. So what we're going to do here is we're just quite simply going to wait until we lose enough speed to be able to deploy the parachute. See my navball just switch over to surface speed as we get lower and lower. That's an auto switch. I didn't have to do that. All right. We are now less than 20 kilometers from the ocean where we are about to splash down. We're still losing speed. I've kept the rocket pointed retrograde the whole time. That's very important. I wanted to have as much air resistance as I could using this capsule to lose as much speed as I could. And look at that! My parachute now, the icon isn't red anymore. If I hit spacebar, it's going to deploy. And it's going to deploy safely, without ripping off. At this point, it is fairly safe to time warp ahead. We're going slow enough that the forces are not going to rip off the parachutes. And the parachute itself is going to really kind of inflate once we hit exactly 1,000 meters. So I advise you to go back to one-time speed right before that, like this. But before that, feel free to time warp. And then I'm going to time warp again until we get very close to 0 altitude and splash down. And here we are, 10 meters away. Splash down. We are officially back home. Now if we hover over the top part here, you suddenly have a couple of options that show up to either go back to the Space Center or just recover the vessel. I prefer to recover the vessel so it's not just eternally floating in the ocean, and we're going to want to have Jebediah Kerman available for another adventure soon enough. So that's it for today. We set up our gang to, get all the information that we need to be able to fly our ship, and then we flew to orbit and back home. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you next week, where we're going to start looking at how to maneuver our ship once we are in space. All of these other vectors that we saw that we could point the ship to, we're going to experiment and see exactly what they do and how you can manipulate your direction, basically handle your ship out in space and orient yourself. That's going to be for the next episode though. Take care everybody. I'll see you next week.